September in northern Kenya. Searing heat, dried up rivers. Just when the need is greatest, mountains of cloud loom on the horizon. As if by magic, almost every year, relief comes in the nick of time. But as well as comfort and refreshment, the floods can bring danger. Too much rain can turn the tracks into quagmires. People who have been waiting for rain for months can suddenly be cut off from the outside world. Supply systems break down, and vast areas vanish underwater. Life in the tropics has always been shaped by drought and flood. In the old nomadic days, people would simply move to higher ground. But when they began to settle, the rains sometimes brought problems. For the animal kingdom, on the other hand, the wet season is always a time of plenty. The huts of the Samburu herdsmen stand in a dry, ocher landscape. The rivers flow no more. Only a green strip of trees reveals their former course. A lonely crocodile on a long journey. Its goal, to find a last puddle in some bend of the river, is becoming harder to achieve. Those who can make a pool for themselves are better off. Life-giving moisture lies under the hot sand, sometimes only a few centimeters down. Elephants know how to find it, and they provide water for a whole community of animals throughout the thirsty months. The elephant's waterholes are soon a crucial lifeline for countless animals of the dry bush. The last drops are bitterly contested. Nobody wants to give way while there is still a chance of easing their desperate thirst. It is astonishing that people too can live in these conditions, in such unforgiving country. They can keep the game animals away from the waterholes by building thorn hedges, but they dare settle here only because they know that the underground supply will be refilled every year. This happens because our planet rotates on an inclined axis, which means that between the tropics, north and south of the equator, the rainfall should return regularly. In any one place, when the sun is directly overhead, it bakes the ground. The heated air rises, setting in motion two huge air masses. Between them there develops a low-pressure system with heavy rainfall, forming a ring round the Earth, here shown in a very simplified form. The local details of the band of cloud are shaped by the rotation of the Earth and the effect of mountains and sea currents. But in principle, with a delay of a few weeks, the weather zones follow the high point of the sun as the Earth swings round it through space. Almost every year, this ensures plentiful seasonal rainfall between the tropics. The inclination of the Earth's axis thus serves not only as a timekeeper for the two hemispheres, bringing winter and summer, it dictates the rhythm of life here too, on the equator. At the beginning of October, the low-pressure zone moves on its way from the north over the East African semi-deserts on the equator. After 3 rainless months, the ground is almost completely bare. The parched earth can take in only a little of the moisture. In a short time, the land is under water. Shallow valleys become rushing streams. In the once dry areas, there's hardly any plant cover to break the force of the flood. Every year, people die here, taken unawares by the power of the water. Vast amounts of loose soil are washed away in the rainy season. Overgrazing has increased the losses in some areas, but erosion by water has always had a great influence on the bare landscape of the semi-desert. In the wide riverbeds, the force of the first wave is buffered for the time being. But the input from other, smaller streams causes it to swell minute by minute. Soon, almost the entire rainfall over hundreds of square kilometers finds its way to the river valleys. The few large watercourses in the semi-desert can suddenly become killers. The Tana, normally a modest little river in northern Kenya. As 1997 became 1998, the El Niño effect transformed it into a stream more than 30 kilometers wide. The longed-for rainy season turned out to be a watery hell. Fields and pastures disappeared under the muddy flood. To the people, this year's rainy season came as a catastrophe, bringing hunger, stress, and disease. But what were the effects of the climatic upheaval on the animals of the area? They, too, suffered losses, and as so often, the misfortune of one was good luck for another. But all in all, it was a time of opportunity rather than danger. In the grasslands further south, the rainstorms brought less spectacular floods than to the thorn scrub of the semi-desert. Here, thicker plant cover held the waters back, so that the rivers swelled more slowly. In October, the Mara still stands comparatively low. The last zebra herds are on their way back into the Serengeti. In spite of the bad weather, the crocodiles are still ready to attack. In fact, they have lost their appetite in the cool weather, because when it's too cold, they can digest their food only slowly. But there's nothing for them to eat here anyway. The zebras can walk all over them. The hippos, which could easily bite a man in two, also let them pass. They will soon have some peace, because for months now hardly any animals will cross the river. At the end of October, the low-pressure system reaches the grasslands of the southern Serengeti. The plains round the rocky spurs of the kopjes have seen no rain since April. By November, the first wildebeest herds have returned from the north. They stand calmly with their backs to the wind in the chilly showers. They avoid the hollows, where the waters will soon collect. For them, the exhausting migration season is over for the time being. Until next May, they will stay here in the southern Serengeti. The plains now offer them plenty of food. A single square kilometre will produce enough grass to feed 1,000 wildebeest for weeks on end. What does a damp coat matter to them? After the hunger of the preceding dry months, they seem full of joie de vivre. The extraordinary rainfall of 97-98 had unexpected consequences for the lions of the grasslands. Most of the herbivores had moved far to the east, where it was not quite so wet. Many lions were therefore forced to leave their empty hunting territories to follow them. The muddy ground has hindered them both, but this time a deep waterhole has helped the hunter. Its view hindered by the tall grass, the topee saw the pitfall too late. The lioness is emaciated. Starving hungry, she has wandered 50 kilometers from her own territory. Scientists had never seen such behavior in the Serengeti before. For the hunters, it was a dangerous, uncertain time, for now many big cats were wandering through the countryside without clear pride relationships. As soon as she has her prey on dry land, the lioness looks for cover in the tall grass. She feels unsafe here and does not want to be discovered. While all around them the herbivores are doing well, this verdant season proves a surprisingly hungry time for some of the hunters. February. The low-pressure front has passed the southern tropics and is once more on the way north from the latitude of Zambia. But El Niño brought rain even to the equator in what is usually the dry season. Every morning, white dots mix with the rich green of the Serengeti bushland. Morning glory opens its sparkling flowers. The long damp season has brought germination to seeds that have lain dormant for years. A dazzling display soon covers the bushes and trees. Even the grass vanishes under the curling tendrils. For impalas, the flowers make a welcome change from their usual diet of leaves. But herbivores are relatively modest consumers of the abundance of food. The true beneficiaries are insects, which now swarm over the carpet of plants in enormous numbers. Butterflies content themselves with a couple of drops of nectar. But their countless caterpillars are just eating machines. In a few days, they do most of the eating that a butterfly does in its entire life. The adults, into which they will develop after they have pupated, have no chewing mouthparts. Insects eat about 3 times as much as all the hoofed mammals together. They consume the vast majority of the plant material and turn it into meat. This makes them the most important prey for a whole range of carnivores. By far the greatest number of these hunters are other insects. Ants tirelessly comb through the tangle of stalks. They fall in swarms upon prey that may be several times their own size. This time the caterpillar goes unnoticed. Like a miniature lion, an ant has seized a praying mantis by the neck. Even on this scale, hunting is not without danger for the hunter. When the mantis feels the bite, the tables are quickly turned. Ichneumon flies have more trouble carrying their much heavier prey. Other wasps have become specialists in caterpillars. This burrowing wasp has prepared an egg chamber. The paralyzed caterpillar will serve as a living food supply for the wasp's larva underground. She still has a long, hard way to go. While the ichneumon is already carefully closing the entrance to her burrow. So that the chamber will not be discovered by parasites, she then camouflages her baby's cradle. The superabundance of insects attracts many interested parties. Abdim's storks have come here from their breeding grounds in South Africa. The storks join countless other animals in exploiting the bounty of the rainy season. But in spite of all the efforts of the birds, the best hunters of insects are always other arthropods. Unnoticed, a constant battle raging in the grass makes use of much more food than all the higher levels of the food chain. Of all the mammals of the Serengeti, mongooses probably account for most of the huge harvest of invertebrates. And the dwarf mongooses have by far the largest population. It is estimated that some 100,000 of them live in the Serengeti. Every day they dig larvae and beetles out of the ground by the ton, even if some of them are not very easy to digest. At about 45,000, the banded mongoose is the second most common predator. Like the dwarf mongoose, they too are active only by day. For better protection, they form groups of about 50 animals together. During their excursions, they are themselves in danger. In spite of all their precautions, most mongooses are killed by other hunters. Martial eagles can take animals up to the size of young gazelles. Mongooses are their regular victims. This is one of the few examples of one carnivore eating another, because there are rarely enough small predators to represent worthwhile prey to a larger hunter. But if the numbers of mongooses seem impressive, in the grassy jungle nearly a metre tall, they are far outnumbered by several million rodents, the most varied of all the groups of mammals. No one knows for sure how many species there are in the Serengeti alone. Various medium-sized hunters feed on the hordes of rodents, among them the serval. But it's not so easy to track down the rats in the grass, let alone actually to catch them. The cat uses hearing as her main way of finding them. A high pounce brings the serval down on top of her prey without any warning sound. Here, too, the herbivores seem to be helpless victims, but try as they like, the hunters will have hardly any effect on the numbers of rodents. Another grass rat meets its end, but their enormous fertility allows their population to recover very quickly when there's plenty of food, as there is now. The hunters, on the other hand, need much longer to bring up their young. By the time their population has built up, most of the rodents will have starved in the coming dry season. Now that it has rained for several months without stopping, rodents scurry around everywhere in the lush green landscape. It doesn't take much skill to catch them. With their enormous population density, some grass rats are forced into the open. There, flocks of grey herons comfortably help themselves. From time to time, the menu is rounded off with a crisp grasshopper, but the main course is always rodents. The heron's skills, honed in countless frog hunts, work just as well with mice. After a few hours feeding, most of the herons are full by late morning. For today, they will leave the rodents in peace. "50 kilometers to the south stand the crater highlands of Tanzania. The slopes that lead down to Serengeti are for the most part very dry. But where the rain shadow of the massif usually allows only dry thorn scrub to grow, there is now enough rain to support lush pastures and a gleaming carpet of flowers. On the other side of the mountains, the cloud fronts roll in daily from the Indian Ocean. Here, after the long El Niño rainy season, it is really wet, even in mid-February. These mountains receive plenty of rain even in normal years, so that they are covered in thick rainforest. In the middle of the highlands is the famous Ngorongoro crater. In its giant bowl, huge masses of water have collected during the last few months. Lake Magadi in the bottom of the crater is usually only a small salty pool. Now it has overflowed into a wide area of the crater floor. Greater flamingos have discovered it. In small groups, they wade through the shallow water, feeding on small crustacea and insect larvae. They stir up the mud with their feet to disturb their small prey. Lesser flamingos are usually here in force, but most of them have moved away. They can no longer find enough to eat. Their filtering beaks are adapted to gathering the tiny algae that live in soda lakes, and these algae are reduced in numbers when the salty water is highly diluted. The herbivores, too, have to avoid the floor of the crater. They are not happy in this muddy country. For frogs, of course, it's a paradise, even when herons try to spoil their day. From a distance, the crater looks mostly green, although more than half of the floor is covered in water. The grass has grown tall everywhere, but only a few animals will, or can, exploit it. The juicy reeds belong to the elephant bulls alone. They don't mind getting their feet wet while they're feeding, and they can free themselves from mud holes a meter deep without any trouble. The herds of elephant cows have moved into the thick woods that start above the crater wall. Among the trees they find plenty of food plants, and the calves are safer than in the bottomless mud of the swamp. Elephants have always haunted these woods on the outer slopes of Ngorongoro. Many other plant-eaters also avoid the crowds in the crater by moving into the surrounding country when there is enough to eat there. In the rainy season, for this reason, the wild animal population in the huge bowl has always been smaller than in the dry season. But today, these wanderers find it ever more difficult because of the dense human settlement in the surrounding area. In February, almost all the wildebeest have retreated to the east of the crater. This region lies a bit higher, and on the slopes of the inner crater the pasture is still fairly dry. The lush swamps in the distance are not for them. They crowd together up here under the rim, where there is now enough grass for them all. Buffalo have no problem with the wet. Indeed, it can't be wet enough for them. This bull is comfortably aware of his privilege as a dominant animal. Wallows like this are very much sought after even in the rainy season. They are monopolized by the really strong buffalo, which stay away from the herd in small groups. The flooding of the crater floor does not only affect the herbivores. The territorial system of the predators also gets confused. Some lions lose a large part of their hunting territory. There is in fact still prey for them to hunt, but the individual prides must now squeeze together into what space remains, and that is not easy for lions. In these new circumstances, a coalition of 5 males drove out all the territory holders in a few weeks. They thus took over all the prides of Ngorongoro. This was a catastrophe for the young cubs. Only a few survived because they got in the way of the family plans of their new bosses. Soon the newly ennobled lords were busy harvesting the fruits of their success. But they are still not completely at ease amongst themselves. The end of February. It should really have been dry for a long time by now. However, new clouds still rise up over the crater wall nearly every day. The so-called short rains, which begin in October in East Africa, have been falling almost without a break until now. A troop of crowned cranes look for somewhere drier. Their courtship season is long over, and they gather here only to feed together. Most of the birds have a permanent partner to whom they will stay mated for life. An occasional dance cements the bond, showing all the others that they are contentedly paired off. After 5 months, the grass-eaters have gone from strength to strength with the excellent food supply, and soon the big rains will bring still more showers and more months of glorious gluttony. These are the weeks when most of the zebra foals are born. The zebra herds have a turbulent time ahead of them. For one thing, the mares are ready to breed again soon after they have given birth. And for another, because of the abundance of food, many young mares are in season for the first time. In good feeding places, the little family groups of zebras now form large assemblies. It's an ideal marriage market, and everywhere young stallions, bursting with energy, are trying their strength. From many such scuffles they gain courage and self-confidence, so that finally they can begin the most important stage of their lives, starting their own family. To do this, they must abduct young mares from their families. This is anything but easy because their fathers are not in the least agreeable and greet each intruder with a fight. Actually, it's surprising that the father defends his daughter so fiercely, because for obvious reasons he will not mate with her himself. It looks as if he wants to let her go only to the best suitor. After more than 2 hours, both of them are completely exhausted. The battle has left its marks. Even though zebras have no obvious weapons, they can cause deep wounds with teeth and hooves. The exhausted leading stallion can no longer withstand the challenger. He gives up. But if his daughter must now leave the family, at least she has a strong and determined partner. It will be some months before the young mare conceives for the first time. Before then, he has a lot to do, defending her from other young stallions and collecting other mares for himself. Only when a stallion has become a father can he be sure that his females will stay with him. Only the youngsters will then leave the troop, and in the case of the daughters, rarely of their own free will. Cheetahs have watched the fight from a clump of thorn-apple plants without much attention. The young cheetahs have something quite different in mind. They are getting stoned. The fruit of the thorn apple is poisonous, and its juice is both hallucinogenic and euphoric. Not only young humans seek out the psychedelic effect of drugs, the young cheetah is soon high as a kite. As always in such cases, reality quickly fades into illusion and he thinks he can take on the world. Zebra are far beyond the capacity of a single cheetah to hunt, and this obviously gives him pause as he comes closer. Anyway, it was cool, man, except for the headache afterwards. The herds change their feeding grounds along the crater walls every few days. An inner compulsion draws them on, perhaps because they would otherwise make things too easy for the predators. The streams, which as little dry season trickles were hardly any obstacle, are now well swollen. Zebras travel along with the wildebeest. For the many newborn foals, the watercourses are serious obstacles, only to be attempted safely while they are in the care of their mothers. To inexperienced mothers, the danger is not obvious. The foal only just manages to escape the current and, confused and exhausted, latches thankfully onto the first zebra it meets. The mother is certainly not keen on her youngster being adopted. At the second attempt, the little zebra masters the obstacle and is soon safe again in the bosom of its family. Incidents like this make the young one's life very difficult now, but the rainy season also brings problems for many strong adult animals. Hooves that have stood for months in wet mud can easily become infected after small wounds. Bacteria and fungi lead to painful inflammations. For these unfortunate animals, every step is painful, and hunters watch for the smallest abnormalities in the movements of the herbivores. They reveal easy prey for a small effort. This Grant's buck will not be able to run at his usual full speed. Both adolescent cheetah cubs have recovered from their hangover and regained their appetite. But they are not averse to a little rough house with a weakling. The jackal had better watch its step. He will have to be patient a bit longer. But his time will come when the cheetah family is relaxing happily in the warmth of the midday sun on the edge of the crater. Cheetahs are in fact rare in the Ngorongoro crater because for a long time lions have ruled the roost here, either stealing their food or killing their young. These cheetahs are lucky. In the last few years, the lion population in the crater has fallen nearly to half, so that they can relax and enjoy the few hours of sunshine before the next shower. But today they have an unexpected visitor. A magnificent male cheetah is approaching. The mother is not at all keen to meet him because cheetahs often behave very roughly when they meet females. Her youngsters could be harmed. He wants to find out whether she will soon come into season, and her recent offspring are just in the way. By intimidating her, he shows the female his strength. There is no way that she would take up with a weakling. Anxiously, the young ones follow his every move as he thoroughly sniffs their mother. The close proximity of the potentially dangerous male creates an unbearable tension among the family. When he finally realizes that he has no chance of becoming a father here, the group relaxes. In a few hours he will move on, alone. The sun will soon once more be directly overhead at midday, bringing the heavy weather front from the south with it. The beginning of March. The crater floor is still for the most part underwater. Every morning mist rolls down the slopes. Now the wildebeest in the crater are giving birth. This is the best time when the calves will benefit most from the coming long rains. In open, dry places, groups of heavily pregnant cows gather. Every morning, dozens of little wildebeest are born. Of all the antelope, wildebeest have a unique way of bringing up their young. Where other babies lie hidden in their first weeks of life, wildebeest calves follow their mothers after only a few minutes. To do this, they have to be on their feet in an unbelievably short time. As soon as they can keep pace with the group, they will find protection in the crowd, especially when there are a lot of calves. For this cow, birth is successfully completed, and she goes at once to her baby to lick it clean. After an imprinting period of 1 or 2 days, the mother and her calf can pick one another out among thousands of other animals. For this reason, the first few hours are crucial for them both. Once the link is formed, it will not easily be broken. After 5 minutes, this calf is fully prepared to face the exciting challenges of its new, sun-drenched world. Small mishaps do little to dampen its enthusiasm. By contrast, a nearby calf is still struggling after half an hour. While its small neighbour eagerly gains strength for its coming adventures with the first warm mouthfuls of milk, the other poor creature hardly reacts to its mother's attempts to make contact. After 2 hours, confused, she gives up. She has made no proper bond with the lifeless bundle. Soon, other interested parties arrive. Uncertainly, the mother watches the drama developing around her baby. The little white-backed vulture still shrinks back from the calf's feeble protest, but then huge lappet-faced vultures appear, and they know how to deal with weakly calves and fawns. Many small gazelles are killed by the hooked beaks of these ominous birds. Finally, the mother realizes what is going on. Her protective instinct was aroused even by the short contact with her calf, and she rescues it from a terrible death. The vultures leave empty-handed this time. The shock and the pain finally spurs the calf into movement, and it staggers off behind its protector. It's mid-March. The sun stands at its zenith, and the low-pressure front will come again in a few weeks' time on its way north. Every evening, storm clouds build up. After only a few weeks' break, the rainstorms start again at full strength. The wet, icy cold nights are a trial for the many foals and calves in the herds. This is the price they must pay for a steady milk supply from their mothers. Long after midnight, the storm eases. But far around Ngorongoro, it is not quiet for long. In the cold light of the moon, hyenas are on the move. They are a much greater danger for the calves than any rainstorm. The mothers make sure that their young are rounded up into the biggest possible groups. Their best defense is to lose themselves in the crowd. If the attackers concentrate on an individual animal, it has little chance of escape. This night, as usual, several calves lost their lives, but the great majority of them were safe in the turmoil of the herd, and in a few weeks they will be even quicker on their feet with more stamina. In May, the Abdim's storks leave in huge flocks for the south, back to their breeding grounds. They are leaving a landscape which, outside the crater, is now rapidly drying out. In the grasslands of the Serengeti, a vast amount of fruits and seeds are now ready for harvest. For the lovebirds, the time of plenty is not yet over. Termites, too, are now busy around the clock, gathering stores for the long dry season to come. Because of the cool, overcast weather, the workers are in no danger of drying out, so in these weeks they are active all day long outside their underground burrows. Much to the delight of the glossy starlings, which now give their fledged young a last strengthening meal as they begin to achieve independence. Soon, for all the inhabitants of the savannah, saving water and energy will once more be the focal point of their lives. But the abundance of the wet season has left them all with plenty in reserve. The rodent population is now enormous. There are more than enough of them to withstand the coming losses from hunger and predation. Not only birds of prey like this black-shouldered kite will be fed by them in the hard times to come. The abundance of mice and grass rats has enabled the golden jackals to raise almost all their young during the rainy season. Many carnivores will only survive the coming hard months because there are still plenty of rodents scampering among the golden stems. They still find enough food after the massive growth of grass this year. Until the herds come back next rainy season, the jackals will live almost entirely on this small, furry prey. While here on the drought-stricken plains of the Serengeti, rodents and jackals struggle through, the rain front is refreshing the Sahel zone and the Upper Nile. The coming months will once again be an ordeal for the animals of East Africa. But one thing is certain. The next rains will bring new opportunities for all those that can survive in this thirsty land until the clouds return.